Okay, this is Thomas Freed on the Liberty Works Radio Network. This is the Truth Attack Hour, and yes, that's right, folks. We're back with the Truth Attack. Okay, so we've had a couple of weeks off here because the Thursday show happened to coincide with both Christmas and New Year's. So there's a lot to talk about, and I'm already worn out. I've been traveling all week, just getting settled in, and I've only got a few notes here to work off of for today's show, but we'll see where it goes. There's been a lot happening in the news. So, we are the Liberty Works Radio Network, and we do need the support of the members of the listening audience to keep the broadcast network operating and the streams of information coming. So, if you enjoy the shows, the information, the discussions, the lectures, and the revelations, and the guests and hosts on the other shows on the Liberty Works Radio Network, we sure would appreciate it if you could find your way over to the libertyworksradionetwork.com website. If you're not already there now, listening through the online radio listen link, we sure would appreciate it if you could find your way over and get signed up as a monthly subscribing member, even if it's as little as $15, $20 a month. Every membership counts, every membership helps, and we do need your support to keep the network operating and the information coming. And of course, if you want to get fully informed on my favorite topic on this particular show, 6 o'clock Thursday evenings, you'll find your way over to taxfreedom.com and start reading, because the Supreme Court has killed the income tax. Or at least they've killed the enforcement operation that the IRS has been unconstitutionally perpetrating, that the DOJ has been unconstitutionally prosecuting, and that the lower federal courts have been unconstitutionally convicting criminally and rendering judgment civilly against the American people on a completely fraudulent basis. The income tax is not a direct tax on everything that you earn under the 16th Amendment. That is a constitutional fraud and has been for 75 years. And when you enforce the income tax as an unlimited direct tax on everything earned by anyone working anywhere in the country without limitation, what you are actually enforcing is the second plank of the Communist Manifesto: a heavy, progressive, or graduated income tax. That's where you find income tax, the Communist Manifesto. That's where you find graduated taxation, the Communist Manifesto. That's where you find unlimited taxation of the people by the bureaucracy of the government in order to rule the people, not to represent them. The entire income tax is a fraud. 1 year ago, in Moore et al. v. United States, the Supreme Court held, 1, income taxes are indirect taxes under Article 1, Section 8, Clause 1. Well, the only powers there are the powers to tax foreigners by impost, exported goods by duty, and commodities, licenses, and corporations by excise. So where is the power to tax the American people and all of their earnings? They're not foreign, subject to an impost. They're not exported, subject to a duty. They're not based in commodities or a licensed activity like selling alcohol, tobacco, and firearms, which are the commodities subject to tax. And they're not operating as a corporate person subject to the excise. So where is the constitutional power under Article 1, Section 8.1 to tax everything that you do in the 50 states? It doesn't exist. It's not there. It's a constitutional fraud that you're taxed by 181, Article 1, Section 8, Clause 1, by impost duty. You're not. And that is why they've had to lie to you for 75 years and tell you it was the 16th Amendment, because you can't get there through Article 1, Section 8, Clause 1. So when the Supreme Court says the income taxes are indirect taxes under Article 1, Section 8.1, they're telling you it's not a tax on you, the citizen, in the 50 states. wherever you are exercising your right to work or your right to acquire, own, and accumulate private property. Federal government's got no jurisdiction and no power to tax either of those activities. It's all been a lie. And that's why they've had to claim that the 16th Amendment is a non-apportioned direct tax without limitation that is unavoidable and which must be paid by the person who earns the money, even if it's a citizen working in the 50 states by right, rather than engaging in a federally taxable activity or transaction subject to taxation, federal taxation under Article 1, Section 8, Clause 1, by imposed duty or excise. There is none. And because there is none, they've had to lie and say it's a direct tax, non-apportioned direct tax under the 16th Amendment. Oh, but wait a minute. The Supreme Court also said in Moore et al. 1 year ago that direct taxes, all direct taxes, must be apportioned to the states for payment. That means the enforcement operation that's been in place for 75 years is a constitutional fraud. It's a crime being committed by the federal government against the people of America. A first-class felony crime, theft, extortion, fraud, intimidation, kidnapping, assault, grand larceny. It's all a fraud. Direct taxes cannot be collected from individuals. Direct taxes must be apportioned to the states for payment. If it's a direct tax, it can't be collected from you. And that's what they've been doing under the 16th Amendment for 75 years, is lying to you about the nature of the tax and enslaving you to the payment of an unavoidable direct tax imposed on all earnings resultant from your working as necessary to live, eat, breathe, and keep shelter over your head. None of those activities are subject to federal taxation in the 50 states. They are all exclusively under state law, under our system of representative government and constitutional law in the constitutional republic. Both governmental entities, federal and state, are limited in what they can do by both the federal constitution and the state constitution. And they are empowered only to the extent that the Constitution authorizes the empowerment. In other words, if the power is not granted by the constitutional document, it doesn't exist in the hands of the state or the Fed, and it remains as a power reserved by we the people. How about the power of legal tender? What does the Constitution say about legal tender? It says no state shall make anything a legal tender in payment of debt except gold and silver coin. I mean, paraphrasing a bit there, but it prohibits the states from making anything but gold and silver coin a legal tender in payment of debt. Now, that clause of the Constitution prevents the states from ever declaring a legal tender. And that is the only clause in the Constitution that addresses legal tender, which means the federal government is not given the power to declare a legal tender by the Constitution. So this is a power that is not granted to the federal government and is prohibited to the states to exercise. And that means the power to decide what's legal tender is in the hands of we the people. And of course, in a free society, that's the only place it can exist. Because in a private transaction between two people, they should be able to agree between themselves what the terms of the deal will be. Oh, you're a trapper, and you need bullets and gunpowder and another gun. Okay, I will trade you my bullets, my gunpowder, and the extra guns I have for your nice furs. I will take your furs as legal tender for payment for the guns and gunpowder. And then no one can come back later on claiming they weren't paid in legal tender. So either the trapper wants his furs back or the trader wants his guns, ammunition, and weapons and ammo back. No! You agreed to the legal tender exchange. No one can impose any other requirement upon you. You can't be forced to use the government fiat if you don't want to, because legal tender is a power prohibited to the states and not granted to the federal government. And of course, what that means is the Federal Reserve notes everyone who's trading for money today is completely unconstitutional as legal tender. And the statute that declares them to be legal tender, I forget which one it is, but it's on the website, taxfreedom.com. The statute that declares them to be legal tender is completely unconstitutional. Congress has no power to declare a legal tender. Gold and silver coin, that's it. No one can be forced to trade in anything else. And the power of legal tender is one of those powers that is left in the hands of the sovereign people. And yes, we are the sovereign power in America. We are the sovereign citizens. Anyone who has a problem with that, just ask them, what form of government do we have in this country? Is it tyrannical or representative? Anyone is too stupid to not say representative, but you can just tear their ass apart. Oh, you want the tyrant, the despot, the dictator to rule, right? Morons. It's a representative government. Who do they think they represent? Mexico? Canada? China? Great Britain? The Pope? Who do they think they represent in government? They represent we, the people. The sovereign power who kept all powers in our own pocket, those not granted to the federal government and those prohibited to the state, like the power of legal tender. Unconstitutional system, both monetary and tax, and they go together. They both, of course, came into being at the same point in time. They both started in 1913. The Federal Reserve Bank issuing the excessive paper currency into circulation in the hands of the institutions so that they get the purchasing power or the new money and you get the diluted, inflated power later on. And the income tax. Both the Federal Reserve Bank and the income tax were both created in 1913. The Federal Reserve Bank pumps the excess paper into circulation. The income tax removes it from the pockets of the people. So there will never be so much currency in circulation that it drives inflation, because inflation kills governments. When people can't afford to eat or live or sleep, the government gets tossed. So they hide the inflation created by printing worthless fiat notes in place of using money, by stealing the excess currency from your paychecks, which forces both parents into the workplace, which puts the children in the hands of the government under the public schools, and the propaganda being pushed to the centralized planning of one national education curriculum dictated by the Department of Education, the federal government. And education isn't in the Constitution. But they got to take over in education because they have access, unlimited access to capital at the Federal Reserve Bank, and the states don't. So because the states couldn't administer, the Fed stepped in and dictated that every single one of the states do the same thing. And that's why all the kids graduating from public school are idiots, virtual idiots. They can't do math, they can't do English, they can't read, they can't write, they can't type. They don't know their own history. They're complete idiots. They've been made to be idiots by a public school system that doesn't want intelligent people with the ability to think independently and critically. They want drones that can push the buttons just well enough to not cut their arm off while they're pushing the button. Hey, I hear the first commercial break coming up. This is Thomas Freed on the Liberty Works Radio Network. This is the Truth Attack Hour. We'll be back in 5. Okay, this is Thomas Freed on the Liberty Works Radio Network. This is the Truth Attack Hour, and I'm going to shift gears here because I just ran right into the anti-tax segment right out of the gate, and I kind of meant to start with current events, but let's jump out here and go back and review the current events. Well, what have we got happening? Well, obviously the big things are fraud in Minnesota and taking Maduro out of Venezuela. So let's talk about that. The fraud in Minnesota has become absolutely monstrous. It's not a few hundred million, it's as much as 9 or 10 billion. And it looks like the money goes right back to the Minnesota politicians who were taking donations from the people who were giving fraudulently the millions of dollars to run daycare shelters that have no kids and aren't open. And the daycare come back with explanations like, oh, he came in the morning at 10 a.m. We do after school daycare from 2 o'clock till 10 o'clock at night. Oh, well, that's nice. But that means you defrauded the state of Minnesota, because the Minnesota law that allows you to get money from the state to run a daycare center requires that in order to get that money, you be open from 6 a.m. in the morning until 6 p.m. at night. So operating from 2 to 10 disqualifies you from the federal funds you've been stealing. There are no kids. There's just people getting paid. You want to know how it works? 2 sisters come from a foreign nation. They go to Minnesota. They each have 4 kids. They each apply to be daycare providers for 4 kids. They're sisters. And the government pays them like $500 a day per kid. So they're getting what? $2,000 a day? $10,000 a week for watching your sister's kids, both of them? Yeah, that's how it works. Instead of taking care of their own kids on their own dime, they're taking care of their sisters, and Minnesota is giving them $100,000 a year to do it. 100,000, more like $500,000. So the whole thing was a fraud. All of these welfare systems set up by the Democrats to buy votes are done without vetting the applicants. Half the people getting Social Security are millionaires. They shouldn't be getting Social Security. Okay, maybe half as high, but 10%? Why are millionaires drawing Social Security? Oh, they paid in. So what? It's not a retirement program. It's not a pension. It's a tax. And you might be eligible, but you might not. And they haven't been doing eligibility testing. They're just passing the money out like candy to buy the votes of the poor and the insecure elderly that don't want to use their own money because everything's so much more expensive. Well, when you get down below a certain level in the means test, you'll be allowed to start drawing Social Security. But you shouldn't be giving it to people that don't need it. It was sold to us in the late 30s as a safety net for those that slip through the cracks, widows and orphans, and others incapable of caring for themselves or understanding what care means. But no, it's been turned into an entitlement to buy the votes of the wealthy. So much so, there's no money left in the pool to pay the poor enough for them to survive. The people who need the money to live are getting $600 a month and can't live on $600. The people that don't need the money at all, including people like, theoretically, Donald Trump, Warren Buffett, Bill Gates, Jeff Bezos, they're getting $4,000 a month. Although I doubt any of those 4 men have even applied for Social Security. If I were worth several billion, I wouldn't go get it. I'd be afraid that if the people found out I was taking Social Security while I was worth $10 billion, they wouldn't stop doing business with my company. Because that's disgusting. But your government's trying to give the money to them. And other wealthy persons, $3,000 to $4,000 a month. They don't need that. And you know what happens to it? Take a look at the front yard. It's lawn ducts. Covered with lawn. That's Social Security. Meanwhile, go into the ghetto. Find out how the elderly black woman is doing in the projects on $800 a month. It's bullshit. It's turned into a reverse Robin Hood. They rob from the poor who work the entire life and then die before age 64. Where the wealthy only pay in up to the first 100,000, or I guess it's a little rating more now, 150,000 that they make. And then they draw Social Security for 30 years, living into their 90s as millionaires. And the poor die for lack of ability to keep the heat on. So the fraud in Minnesota has just expanded. It's huge. And Walz, what's his reaction? He's not trying to stop it. He's threatening to raise the Minnesota National Guard to fight against and oppose ICE enforcing the law against the fraud. And I suppose that would include the FBI investigating them too. This guy is actively discussing seditious rebellion. What does he think? Minnesota's going to succeed? He's on the edge of being arrested for sedition and insurrection. You remember that? January 6th, insurrection? Yeah, right. It was a mostly peaceful protest. There was a little bit of violence, yes, but the only person that died was Ashley Babbitt, a retired Air Force veteran female. And she was shot by a Capitol Police officer for trying to enter a room unarmed. She was trying to enter a room, and a Capitol Police officer shot her dead. And what was the reaction from the liberals in that case? They took the officer and hid him for 6 months on a military base so he couldn't be questioned and there could be no investigation of the shooting whatsoever. And of course, now, a couple of days ago, we had a woman, Renee Good, who was shot by ICE while trying to run over an ICE agent with an SUV. So in one case, a woman is shot by a police officer on the Capitol, and the liberals cover it up and don't say a word, and the mainstream media didn't report it. They said police officers were killed, not a protester. They lied. No cops died that day on the mall. None. None. But when Renee Good is shot by an ICE officer because she was trying to run him over with an SUV, which is a deadly weapon, by the way. Oh, now the liberal left and the mainstream media are all up in arms. Oh, it's the worst thing ever. Trump is killing people. Oh. Absolutely insane. What hypocrites. What lying hypocrites. Anyone who says anything about this woman, ask them. Ask them about Ashley Babbitt. Why didn't you say anything about it when she died? You hypocritical piece of crap. Perfectly fine for the liberals to kill people. But God forbid an officer should be allowed to defend his life when he's attacked and assaulted by a 3-ton deadly weapon. And some mentally unstable woman. That's the only explanation for getting into a car and trying to run over an armed police officer. You're mentally unstable. Trump is right. The mainstream media and the left have led these people so far into delusion, they can't tell what's true or what's moral or what's right from what's a lie, what's immoral, and what's wrong. So you got this huge double standard. Anything the conservatives do is a crime. Anything the liberals do is totally excusable because they were the victim. So the Minnesota fraud, and of course, anyone who thinks this is limited to Minnesota is stupid. Did you know that the Somali ambassador to the UN is registered as a daycare owner in Ohio? I'm not saying he's a fraud too. Maybe there's one or two daycare centers that actually are operating as daycare centers. We'll have to find out. The FBI is going to look into that. What do you think? Think there are any legitimate? Yeah, there's probably a few that are legitimate. But if you think it's limited to Minnesota, you aren't paying attention. You just aren't paying attention. And of course, what ICE is doing is enforcing the law. If you enter this country illegally and they catch you at the border 100 feet into America, they don't take you into custody and bring you in for due process. They turn you around and send you back. The due process for being caught after illegally entering is you're sent out, you're deported. Now, you get further process if you're accused of a crime and are going to be tried or prosecuted. That comes with additional due process. But the appropriate and the legal and the statutory due process for entering the country illegally is you get put back out of the country immediately. There's no court review. There's no asylum plea properly filed in another country for a court to review. You come in illegally, you get caught, the process is out you go. There's no right to stay. You only have rights if you entered legally. Then you get further due process. Entering illegally doesn't get you due process other than the process of being turned around and sent back home. Theoretically, without a bullet in your head. So, what do we want to talk about? Well, look at what Trump is doing with the economy. I told you things would turn around. I told you for 4 years the inflation was based on the price of oil and energy. Look where we're at. Oil has now been as low as $55. Today it's at $58 a barrel. With what's developed here in Venezuela, which we're going to talk about in a moment, it's probably going to go down to at least, well, I'd say maybe $50, at least for a little while. Probably won't stay there very long. But they have, Venezuela has more oil than Saudi Arabia under it. It's a heavy crude that can only be refined in certain places. But bringing that back online under U.S. control in a partnership with the new Venezuelan government will shift the balance of power in energy away from OPEC and to America. As I said, Venezuela has more oil under it than Saudi Arabia. It's the largest known reserves on the planet. And this is the oil that Maduro was illegally selling to Cuba, Iran, China, Russia, and other bad actors to support, Islamic terrorism and tyrannical governance all over the planet. This is not known, but of course this is the other story. Trump moved in, the military executed perfectly to take Maduro and his wife out of the country. They didn't go in to kill him like they did with Obama. They went in and they captured him because he has an indictment in New York for drug smuggling. And hours before they took him, he was meeting with China to set up new networks and new routes for China to move its fentanyl into America and to take the Venezuelan oil for China, which is what they do. They go to a country and offer to put up money to help you develop your resource. So they put up more money than the country can ever pay back, and they develop the resource, and the home country gets to use it for a little while. And then the debt becomes so burdened, China has to step in and take the resource and the infrastructure in order to forgive the debt. Oh, we'll just take all that oil in the refinery bill. You don't have to pay us back. Thanks. And then the Chinese army is there to defend the facility. And the country is used. Okay, we'll be back in 5. Okay, this is Thomas Fried on the Liberty Works Radio Network. You know, during that commercial break, I just saw on TV the reporting that Walls knew about the fraud right from the beginning. It was reported from within the ranks of the people supposed to be watching for that kind of stuff inside the administration. They found it, they saw it, they identified it, they referred it to him, they told him about it, and he ignored it. So it's been an intentional fraud that he now appears to be a conspirator, a co-conspirator in committing and allowing to be committed in order to let Minnesota be the wonderful, progressive, friendly, helpful state. Sounds like he should be in prison. Okay, as I said, oil is down at 58. It's been as low as 56 with the Venezuelan oil coming online. Should probably go to 50 for at least a little while. It probably won't stay there because 55, 56 seems to be the right point for the price of oil. In the meantime, we've got inflation below 3% in 8 months. Took Joe Biden 24 months after running it up to 20%. And of course, the inflation coming down wasn't anything he did. It was due to the fact that he lost the election. People knew he was going out of office. Gas is below $3 a gallon. In Oklahoma, it was below $2 a gallon. Diesel is between $3 and $3.50. So the price of energy is down. The costs that were imposed as a result of that energy increase should come out of the prices of products. So we should get a little bit of relief because of the lower price of oil and transportation. But when inflation strikes, you never get it all back. You never get it all back. Prices may come back a little bit, but they're permanently higher forever because of what the Democrats did in printing trillions of dollars. I pointed out that between 2016 and 2021, the M1 money supply went from 5 trillion to 21 trillion. COVID, they printed $7 trillion. They'd already printed 10. And then they put it all in the hands of the institutions. And right now you've got $8 trillion sitting on the sidelines in the money markets at Wall Street, looking for a buy-in opportunity on the stock market, which is approaching 50,000 on the Dow and 25,000 on the NASDAQ. The NASDAQ used to be about 1/3 of the Dow. It's now closer to 50%. It's just like 45, 46. And with tech being hot, it'll soon be 50. So the economy, and you got trillions of dollars promised from private companies, both foreign and domestic, to start building and producing here in America, since it's pretty clear you're not going to be able to rely on supply chains from China reliably. They might get restored. They can ever get the tariffs figured out, but we need to produce here, especially critical things like microchips, pharmaceuticals, energy, the things that keep you alive and move you ahead down the road, allow you to defend yourself from your enemies, which is the story overseas right now. Islam has apparently reached critical mass in Europe, and the domestic populations there are pissed that the foreign governments have let millions of Islamics into the country who are now moving aggressively, no longer being a minority population. They're not majority, but they're a much larger effective bloc, and they're now assaulting the domestic cultures of those European nations by imposing the religious Islam, the Islamic religious practices in those nations. No, they don't want to assimilate. Once they reach critical mass, they demand on ruling and controlling your streets, and the calls to prayer at 3 a.m. and 11 at night. You don't do religion in public. It's a private thing, unless it's not religion. It's just a way of controlling the population. I've pretty much come to the conclusion that Islam is a cult of male domination over the female. It's a cult of male domination over the female. The females in the Islamic society are reduced to Slavic property. Literally Slavic property. Women supporting the liberal side should be ashamed of themselves. Just ashamed. And meanwhile, on the other side, Iran is in near revolution. Khomeini is talking about possibly having to flee to Russia as the streets in Iran are filled with protesters tossing out the radical Islamic rule that they've had to suffer under tyrannically since they seized power in the early 70s. Iran was a civilized nation with a westernized people. Education, universities, oil, and radical Islam moved in and sent them back to the Stone Ages. Just like they do everywhere once they reach critical mass and take over. It's not a religion of peace. It's a religion of peace while it infiltrates. Once it has infiltrated and reached critical mass, it becomes a religion of domination. Both the females and then the entire society. By running government based on the religion, the Quran. This is from the 10th century. They're living in the Stone Ages, and Europe has allowed them to invade and take over through the same insane immigration policies this government adopted under Biden and the Democrats. Let them all in. Don't worry about assimilation or what will the consequences be later of not having vetted any of these people for disease or extreme political or religious beliefs. And New York, apparently, is just as stupid as it gets. They've elected a communist 24 years after Islamic terrorists, believing in socialism, took out the Twin Trade Towers, attacked the Pentagon. Good God. What the hell is wrong with New York? You don't really think anything's going to get bigger and better under socialism. The socialists don't produce anything. What you need is to produce more housing. And anything that these thieves try to do by taking property from white people is going to be stricken down by the Supreme Court. And there will be lots of organizations to argue it all the way through the state court and into the federal court, which is where it will probably have to go to tell the state of New York, no, you can't just steal property because they're white. And you can't forbid them from buying property because they're not a government agency. The states, the liberal states, are going insane. They've mismanaged their states so badly, they're in economic ruin. And the only option the liberals have is to steal more. In California, they passed a new law that was so tough on the refineries, they're closing. The 2 refineries have told California, F you, bye, good luck. Now they have to import oil. Probably from Venezuela. Who's going to run the refinery? Oh, the state of California is going to do that, sure. And a lot of other organizations are leaving. Big business is abandoning California. And Newsom talks about how wonderful it is there. Nobody who had their houses burned out, there's like 2 guys who've been able to rebuild their lots. Everybody else, there's no rebuilding. They can't get the permits. State's not going to let them rebuild the land. They're just going to make them pay tax on it until they sell it to the state or some NGO the state approves of. And California's proposal, Newsom, we'll raise the money. We're going to put a 5% wealth tax on billionaires, which is totally unconstitutional. You can't pick one segment of the population to tax. And taking 5% wealth would force every billionaire to sell huge blocks of the stock in their company that actually comprises their wealth, because they don't have $10 billion in cash under their mattress or at the bank. They've got $10 billion worth of stock. And to sell 5% of it will cause the price of the stock to fall. And if they all had to do that, all those companies falling would cause the Dow to collapse. Because that's the only way for the billionaires to raise 5% of their wealth is to sell stock. So Newsom wants to cause a stock market crash and a depression in order to keep his lying ass in office. What a piece of crap! Totally unconstitutional to tax billionaires 5% and nobody else a dime. Why don't you just tax the Jews, Newsom? Why don't you just tax the Jews at 10%? You idiot. This whole concept of graduated taxation of citizens. Citizens who make less than 100K pay nothing. Citizens who make up to 200K pay one rate. 400K a different rate. Over $1 million a different rate. This whole idea of graduated taxation of citizens is unconstitutional because it's not uniform. And if you replace intrinsic uniformity with this theory of geographical uniformity that the courts have fraudulently used for 200 years, you can end up with allowing a tax on Jews and Islams with no tax on Christians. Because you're allowed to discriminate as long as it's done with geographical uniformity, which means the Jews in California, New York, Illinois, Texas, and Florida, and all the other states would have to be treated the same. But as long as they're all treated the same, it's okay to tax them at 90% and the whites at 5%. As long as you're treating all the whites in all the states only at 5%. So as long as it's geographically uniform, it's perfectly okay to discriminate on whatever basis you want. Religion, color, national origin, gender, age, sexual orientation, perfectly okay, as long as you're geographically uniform with your prejudicial discrimination. I'm calling BS. BS. Geographical uniformity was adopted as the basis for legitimacy when the tax only applied to impost duty and taxable materials, to commodities, products, things that had no spirit, inanimate taxable things, and inanimate persons, like the corporate person or the licensed person, where the level of tax could be based on the level of earnings derived from the enjoyment of the privilege being taxed. Selling alcohol, tobacco, firearms, being a corporation or a licensed person to do business in something like alcohol, tobacco, or firearms. Then because there was a privilege being enjoyed, the tax could be based on how much earnings were enjoyed as a result of the privilege. So a company making $10 million from selling alcohol could be taxed at a higher rate than a company making $10,000 selling alcohol. And you only have inanimate persons there with no rights and a privileged basis. But when you start taxing people directly, without uniformity, you have violated every single concept and precept in the Constitution and have implemented instead the second plank of the Communist Manifesto, which is what funds the socialist state and the government takeover of everything they want to take over, because when they can reach into your pocket and steal as much as they want before you're ever paid, they don't need to represent you. They can just steal their money and rule you. And rule you. Which is what they've done for 75 years since World War II. There's no representation here. There's no constitution left in the government. It's all judicial legislation. It's just been made up by seditious, treasonous judges. We'll be back next week with more. Yep, you're welcome. Always fun.